All right, let's get going. So everybody knows you're here tonight to really talk about self-care and this new norm, this new kind of world we're living in right now, and what does that look like for each one of us, and how is that really different for each one of us? If you don't know me, my name is Megan Norriss. I'm your well-being manager here at Cone Health. Behind the scenes a lot on Live Life Well if you're a Cone Health employee. So you get a lot of the wellness emails and things from our team. And I have been here for about 14, 15 years, and I really enjoy kind of working with you guys in healthcare. And I think there might be some people here from other organizations that we partner with even through Cone Health. So welcome, and I really hope you guys enjoy this, and I hope you get a takeaway tonight on some tools that you can use. That's my goal for you. So I want to start first just with a question, really, of how has right now the world we're living in affected you directly? And I would love for you to either send it privately or to everyone in the chat box real quick. So there's some examples here: remote working. I know that's how it's hit me. At home learning too. New technology. I can really associate to probably 50 to 75% of the things on this list, but maybe what's one thing that stood out for you? In addition to this list, just as you're kind of thinking through how it's affected you and given to you that feedback in the chat box, looking at mental health symptoms that have shown up since the COVID-19 outbreak. This is a survey that was done about mid-2020, so COVID-19 had been around for a couple of months in the United States, and it was done in the U.S. here. More mental exhaustion or emotional exhaustion, increased sadness in day-to-day life, irritability, generally feeling more confused, insomnia, anger, feelings of guilt even. So all of these are just some signs and symptoms that people reported about July, about summertime. And then with you guys' feedback, I hear somebody said, most of them, lots of urgent requests and not necessarily having time to do your main job. I understand that. I know with remote work types of things too, right? We like to schedule now a lot of virtual meetings back to back, and sometimes that doesn't give us a lot of space to actually do the work we're trying to do, which feeds the frustration. I see less social interactions coming through the chat box, lack of places to go, fear of crowds. I know when we talk here in a moment about your self-care toolbox and what that means, most of us have lost access to what we did for self-care or for our own wellness. And so the efforts of this webinar is to really help provide you some new tools or some new thoughts of things that might be able to work for you. I see remote working, feeling of isolation, loneliness, increased stress, increased emails, increased technology use, still going into the office daily, but it's still isolated location or it's away from the main thoroughfare of people. So increased stress. Thank you guys for that. I think it's important for you to realize, all of this feedback comes from each of your coworkers. So you're not in this alone. Everybody has been affected. This is a unique time in all of our history where every single person in America and across our globe has been touched in some way by this. So I'll talk for a moment here about a concept I learned in the blog and article related to this is linked at the end of the presentation, which is why I'm going to send you the slides, because I think it's really useful for you to read through that article and see what surge capacity really meant to this person. And it was a term that was coined from a psychologist that someone went to see for counseling during this pandemic time. And I think they still see them regularly. But the concept of surge capacity came up in one of her conversations with a psychologist. And what it is they define it as a collection of adaptive systems, mental and physical, that we draw on for short-term survivals in acutely stressful situations, such as natural disasters. And each one of us has a different capacity to handle that stress, changes in current circumstances, but how we process it also comes differently to each and every one of us. Our current situation and constant change have pushed us into modes of chronic stress where we're really used to dealing with short-term stress, so we can see that like light at the end of the tunnel and when it's going to be over. But not necessarily for long term, where it just kind of keeps going and then it keeps changing and then it goes again and we don't really know what's coming next. And that's where this concept of surge capacity, are we depleted? Is our capacity now met? And how many times have you maybe felt that kind of through the last, it's now been 9 months. Like how many times have you felt that, oh my goodness, my surge capacity, my capacity has now been met maybe 5 times, or I've gone past capacity. And so the building of your resilience toolbox is really, what are the tools that you draw on when life gets tough? So what do you do to fall back on? What is there for you to fall back on that's healthy when the stress levels begin to rise? And it's always a good idea to have multiple tools in that toolbox. Because the more you have to fall back on, if one thing's not available, the next thing could be. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that capacity, but kind of in a different visual. I love this, and I feel like I think of this often when I think of my workload or how it's coming in, how it's coming and going, and then how I feel. It kind of can help me put it a little bit to a visual aid. So thinking of it almost as like the tipping point. So you can kind of see down there at the bottom left-hand corner of this chart, the pressure is low, so there may not be even a lot going on. And so often actually too, we can hit boredom, and so our performance is even low. And this can be at work. It's mostly referencing work, but you can kind of think of it too at home even. And then the pressure begins to build. We might have a couple of deadlines. It might be the normal workflow or usually our optimal work pace. So we're comfortable, and then we kind of start to even circle up to an optimal performance. Where you lie on this scale to get to optimal is very different from your coworker to coworker, or from person to person. And so there's no right or wrong place to be on this scale, but I just point that out. We all kind of have that optimal point, and then what we have from there is the tipping point. We've now pushed ourselves over into strain, and then when we get all the way down to the bottom of that hill, it's burnout. So we've kind of like, I'm done. Your feelings of overwhelmedness, and you don't really know how to turn around and get back. The pressure is really high, and therefore the performance starts to really dip down. The self-care, this resilience toolbox, helps prevent us from getting to that point of burnout, reduces the negative effects of stress, and helps you get grounded and refocused on where you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing what you're doing. And I love this quote, and I just think it's something really important to remember, because we often think of self-care as something that we get to do after we've done the work that we're supposed to be doing, but rather think of self-care not as a reward, but a part of the process. There are things we need to do along the way to keep our tank full, so that we can continue to fill the tanks of others, because at least in healthcare, that's what we do a lot of. And then building on that concept of stress and what it is, so first of all, it's definitely something that affects every single one of us. There are positive stressors and negative stressors, or eustress and distress. So the birth of a baby or a marriage in a family, of course, could be that's a eustress often. It's a positive stressor, but of course, the death of a family member, something along those lines, or the work stress that we're experiencing maybe right now, it would probably be negative. And then long-term stress does affect your health. We're going to kind of talk about that in just a second. But we have these two, in our nervous system, we have parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So we have this fight or flight part of our nervous system, and then we have rest and digest. So in a dangerous situation, stress is signaling to the body to prepare to face a threat or flee to safety. In these situations, like your pulse may quicken, you breathe faster, your muscles tense up, your brain actually uses more oxygen and increases activity. All functions here are really aimed at survival in response to that stressor. And there's also non-life-threatening, of course, situations, but stress might motivate us, such as when we need to like take a test or interview for a new job, again, like having a baby or getting married and planning the things that come into that. So those are all the fight or flight piece of it, but rest and digest is where we're literally able to kind of take a step back, reset our nervous system, and calm down. And we're going to talk about really, that's where our self-care toolbox is going to focus tonight on what are the resources that I can put in there to get to rest and digest. I want to share this quote with you, and I'm also have a link to the podcast as well as the book. It was written and really released like right at the beginning to middle, I think, of COVID this year by two sisters, Emily and Amelia Nagoski. The book is called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. The stress itself will kill you faster than the stressor will, unless you do something to complete the stress response cycle. While you're managing the day's stressor, your body is managing the day's stress. It is absolutely essential to your well-being that you give your body the resources it needs to complete the stress response cycles that have been activated. And here is where we really illustrate what happens when stress comes into our body. I'd love for you to type in the chat box while I'm kind of talking through this. What do you think are some of the things that you know you feel as soon as stress hits? So if you look at this image on the left here, it talks about what you feel in your body, your mind, your behaviors that come into play, emotions. So headaches, a lot of us might think of headaches and muscle tension, not necessarily always related to stress, but it very well could be. Worrying, inability to concentrate, maybe difficulty sleeping, and nightmares it even has. Here, drinking more, sleeplessness, restlessness, loss of confidence, irritability. We saw that on another slide where a lot of people were really reporting that. Anger, anxiousness. I see in the chat coming through, fatigue, stress eating, irritability, sleeplessness, concentration. Yeah, so as you look at the stress response cycle, you can kind of see how this flows. So the stressor is introduced up here at the top, and then we have a reaction that comes into play with that stress. And then our body starts to feel that stress, just as it kind of said in that previous quote. It's not all in our heads. Our body has to also process what's happening as the stressor is introduced. And then it usually offsets with our health. So what's happening with our own health and well-being, and it usually is reducing it to some extent, which is what we're seeing kind of pop up in these symptoms on the left-hand side. And now we have an increased sensitivity to stress. So what happens is the next stressor comes in, and it might tip us over the scale a little bit more. And then the next stressor, so we just become more and more sensitive to the stressors coming at us. And then that's where we see like that boiling point, or it's got to pop. So that's why it's really important to try to deal with the stressor coming in, and not always the reaction to stress. While this is important, we have to figure out how to process the stressors coming in. Here we go. Oh, there we go. So I call it methods for madness. I think that's usually fairly fitting depending on the situation at hand. The first one here, I'm going to just kind of walk through a couple different options here, and then on the next few slides, I'll break down a few of those. The first one is to just take a moment to stop. So I use this as an acronym. It could be stand up or sit down. So if I'm sitting down right now, it's stand up. Maybe I've closed my eyes and just tune in. So it's not necessarily a time to like take judgment or anything like that. Oh my gosh, why am I so tired or anything like that? Just tune in. Maybe you feel tired. Maybe you feel overwhelmed, and that's okay. And then you just take in a moment to breathe. Take a full inhale, full exhale. And then you're taking a moment to observe. So again, part of that tuning in process and thinking about the possibilities, okay, how am I going to move forward through the rest of my day? Like the next email can't tip me off over the scale. The next question about this can't push me over, but how am I going to instead receive that next piece of either a work or ask or whatever it might be, and what am I going to do with it? Maybe it's I need to get it, and then I need to just take a step back once I get it, or take a deep breath before I answer or react. Often things that practices around mindfulness or meditation, if you practice that, it just makes us more aware and less reactive. Take time off using pal time, step outside, get a breath of fresh air, seek help, talk to a counselor, talk to a psychologist, talk to a psychiatrist, talk to someone. Lots of amazing resources right here inside of Cone Health and within our community as well. To just sometimes it's so helpful just to pick up the phone and just say it all what's on your mind. And then maybe you have someone else you can reach out to just talk. Take your breaks. as much as you can. Understandably so, it can be very difficult in times like today and not in times like today. But how will you take a break of some sort during the day? Try eating your lunch somewhere else. I'll be the first to admit, majority of the time it's at my desk in front of a computer. So how can you be more mindful about me working from home? Most of the time I'm just like, I try to go to my front steps and sit outside with my dog and let her run around in the front yard, and just doing something different to take a step away. Get sleep. Get at least 8 hours of sleep at night. Or could you commit to one day during the week to get that 8 hours in? Does that mean you have to go to bed early? Like, how are you going to plan for that? Find a hobby. Often when we try something new or try something different, we find something just new that we didn't know we'd be interested in and we didn't know we'd be good at. And it can be very rewarding to trying something just different and outside of our box. Exercise. A lot of us kind of look at that word and we're like, oh, but I don't have time and I don't like it and things like that. I would encourage you just to physically move your body, however that looks like for you. Research has shown kind of time and time again, the fastest way to reduce a stressor or stress response in your body is to physically move. So get out, move around the house, take a walk around the island at your house and your kitchen, whatever it is, but physically move. And that immediately elicits a stress response cycle or a reaction to that stress response cycle that starts to reduce anxiety and feelings of stress. And then spending time with friends and family. Of course, right now, those are people in your bubble or in your home, but definitely it can be virtual, it can be online, it can be, you know, all the new innovative ways we've thought of to connect with others right now. I want to break down mindfulness for a moment here. So mindfulness is the ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we're doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. So again, it increases our awareness so that when a situation arrives that elicits stress, we don't become overreactive to it, but rather we can usually kind of step back, think about it, and then react. So think before react. And it's something that each of us has access to already, but again, it's like a muscle. So it's kind of like a little guy on the left-hand side here. It's supposed to, I think, be like your brain, but it's a muscle. We have to access it, we have to use it, we have to do it in order for it to become a bit more like second nature. So movement meditation, kind of what I was talking about in the last slide with exercise or just movement, period. And then another great way, and pretty much what I do when it comes to mindfulness, is short pauses inserted throughout the day. So if I've got a lot going on, then I have to take a step away. I'm just no good going into the next conversation usually. Or if I feel myself kind of getting to that tipping point in the middle of the day, take a step back, just take a breather, and either not think about work for the next 2 seconds or think about it and think about how I can kind of reflect and refocus on where I'm headed next. All of this reduces, again, stress, gains awareness and insight, and increases our attention to not just our well-being, but others around us. We kind of get this better insight to kind of understanding what's happening around you, so you can kind of see it on your coworkers, in and with your coworkers, whether it's on them, literally with their nonverbal cues, and then we also pick up on it verbally as well, and so we can kind of help others process their own stress, and then again our own. Meditation is a bit more of a set practice versus mindfulness. So it uses a technique to train attention and awareness. We're not trying to turn off thoughts. So most people think we've got to sit there and not think about anything for 5 minutes or 1 minute, and that's not true. We're not trying to turn off thoughts or feelings, but instead we observe them without judgment. So the thoughts may come in and you're like, thank you very much, and then they exit, or we push them off to the side. It's a method to increase mindfulness. The meditation kind of feeds mindfulness, and just like meditation, or mindfulness, it is a skill or a muscle, so it needs to be practiced so you can use it and continue to grow that muscle. I put a link here to mindful.org. It's really perfect about what is mindfulness, and there's a ton of other great resources on that website as well. Physical activity. So again, with the movement meditation, and like I said earlier, it's really been shown to be the most efficient and the quickest way to reduce stress. It reduces the cortisol and adrenaline in our body that's resulting from stress or from that fight or flight moment where cortisol begins to increase, adrenaline begins to increase because our bodies are meant to adapt to the situation we're in. So it's just doing its job. And then our next job is to kind of hopefully kick in that rest and digest phase, like, I got to step away, I need to take some movement, and I need to just take a rest for a moment. So it stimulates the endorphins from the brain to release, and those help elicit feelings of relaxation and elevated mood. So, and then again, for stress relief, it can be any physical movement. Nothing in particular, nothing fancy, no gym membership needed, no equipment needed, just move. Breathing meditation. This one's huge. So think about like that time when you've been really stressed out, and then you probably make it to a point where you can kind of step away for a moment and you're like, I don't even know if I breathed for the last 5 minutes, or I can't remember, because, you know, it's an involuntary thing that our bodies are physically meant to do on their own. We don't have to think about doing them, but it's also the first thing we forget to do. So we hold our breath in moments of stress. I can tell you, like personally, I was a competitive horseback rider for many years, and as soon as I stepped out of that arena, I was sure that I did not breathe for the entire 3-minute round in that arena. But so it really resonates with me to just, oh my goodness, remember to breathe. So if you want to follow this little meditation here for a second, I'm going to give you a moment to actually do this. So here we go. Get ready to inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Let's do it one more time. Breathe in. And out. I'd love to know in the chat box if you did that with me and if it made a difference in how you felt, because oftentimes we don't realize like how fast we're going until we mindfully take a few breaths. While you're giving me some feedback in the chat box, I'll talk a little bit about breathing meditation. Science shows us that it helps regulate your nervous system. So it really helps reset your central nervous system to that rest and digest phase. Breath work, there's a couple different examples you can use. Something as simple like what I put on the screen here. Breathing as is, so don't change your breath. Just breathe in and out, but be mindful of what you're doing. Kind of think about your inhale, think about your exhale. Box breathing, there's a link to this here. It's really where you inhale for 4 seconds or whatever amount of seconds, and then you pause for 4. Exhale for 4, pause for 4, and then inhale for 4. So you kind of imagine it going in a square. Ujjayi breathing, belly breathing, and lion's breath. The lion's breath is one where you really, it's almost like that frustration feeling or the vent feeling where you breathe in and then you're kind of like, and it does almost immediately help reduce some frustration or anxiety that you might be feeling. Belly breathing, take your hand over your breast, inhale, press your belly towards your hand, and then exhale, let your belly go. Ujjayi breathing is something done often in power yoga, and it kind of makes it's meant to make the center of your chest feel warm. It actually translates to a powerful, victorious breath. So it's kind of hokey pokey as that might sound. If you practice that inhale through your nose, and then you actually exhale, keep your mouth closed with constriction at the back of your throat. And you can kind of hear it as you do it. It makes almost like the waves of the ocean or the sounds of the waves of the ocean. And so it's commonly practiced in meditation and yoga because you can hear, it's audible. It's an audible breath. There's a couple other links here to a few different types of meditations. Again, there's a million out there, but these were 3 that I found that were really helpful, and I liked them. One of the other things you can do is simple self-care questions. So this is actually from a card that I made, and I handed it out on some of our Wesley Long units, where it was just kind of like a little pocket card, or you can hang it in a break room. But it's a reminder: have you eaten in the last 4 hours? Have you taken any medications you needed? Feel free to answer these in the chat box if you want to. When was the last glass of water you had? Can you take a guess at how many hours of sleep you had last night? Are you in any pain? And that means kind of like a head to toe scan. Do your elbows hurt? Do your knees hurt? Does your back hurt? Do you have a headache? How do you feel? Stressed, sad, angry, happy, energetic, joyful? Again, all of these things are not meant to be judgment. They're meant to increase awareness of like, oh man, no wonder I feel like awful today. I only slept for 4 hours last night. I have a raging headache and I'm overwhelmed. And so then from there, you might develop like, oh, I got to do something about this, right? And what are you going to do? But it just increases awareness. That's all it's meant to do. So I want you guys to take the moment right here before we wrap up tonight to put in the chat box what's one thing you can take away from tonight, from anything we talked about today, or maybe it's something else that we didn't talk about, to put into your own self-care toolbox. So I'd love to know that one thing. Go ahead and type it into the chat box for me. And then while you're typing that, think about too, next up is what's your commitment to self-care going to look like? So beyond that one thing, what's 4 more things you're going to add to that list? So I really would prefer that, in a toolbox, we don't have one screwdriver. You have to have 5 that fit the different Phillips head and flathead and all of that when you look at a toolbox. So one size doesn't fit all situations. So think about it from that aspect and choose 5 whole things as your homework and your takeaway. And where are you going to put the list so it's visible? Are you going to tell somebody that you have this list, that you have this fallback list? Maybe you put the list on your bathroom mirror. Maybe you put it on your desk at work. Maybe you put it in your phone, in your notes. Commit the time. So even if it's 5 minutes or 1 minute, every minute counts for you, and you deserve it. Reward yourself along the way even. I love the feedback that I'm getting in the box. I'll just kind of speak to it. So taking a step back, setting boundaries, it's huge. Let's see here. I'm scrolling down, guys. The meditation and mindfulness websites, YouTube, change in location, stepping out of the house and into nature, exercise by taking a walk. Need to incorporate more movement because I'm not going to the gym since the beginning of COVID. Yes, it's hard. Going to bed earlier, outside for fresh air, schedule time for self-care as a part of our routine. Knowing that it's okay for me to put myself first, and then maybe taking a step back and saying no. I love that. That's great, guys. Thank you. Like I said earlier, at the end of this slide deck, this is some of the resources that were used as I put the slide deck together, but also really great resources for you guys to tap into if you're looking for something else. That Completing the Stress Cycle is a podcast. If you click on that link from a phone or something like that, it'll just pull right up. And I listened to it one day when I took a walk. I thought it was great. I actually came back and listened to it again so I could take notes. Reading meditations, the Surge Capacity article is here. Mindful.org, and then Harvard Health actually has some really great helpful information. And then I'll put a plug out here too, because the site wasn't live when I made this presentation, but www.conehealth.com/mental-wellbeing has an amazing set of resources on it for you to use. Right? If you have any questions, I don't want to hold you all over time. So feel free to pop them into the chat box and I'll stay online for a few moments. But if you guys don't, have a great night. And I thank you so much for joining this evening.